The US President Barack Obama has welcomed the deal agreed by America and Russia to destroy Syria's arsenal of chemical weapons. But he warned that if Syria failed to live up to expectations, the US was still prepared to act. The deal was hammered out in Geneva after 3 days of talks, and there's a wider goal, an end to Syria's civil war. Our international editor, Lindsey Hilsum, is there. So, Lindsey, just how big a breakthrough is this?
Krishnan, who would have thought 10 days ago, when airstrikes looked inevitable, that we'd be where we are today? Of course things will go wrong. This could fail. But I bumped into Lakhdar Brahimi, the UN Secretary-General's special envoy on Syria earlier today. He was walking with a very sprightly step. This looks very encouraging, he said. He is certainly hoping that this could mean a broader peace in Syria, that the chemical weapons could lead to something else. And, you know, it seems that we haven't seen in a long time. It was like the end of the Cold War, with Russian and American diplomats getting together, spending long nights, thrashing out a deal. A breakfast breakthrough in Geneva. The US Secretary of State and his Russian counterpart had been up late into the night, and by this morning they had a deal. In the next few days, the US-Russian plan for the elimination of Syrian chemical weapons must be handed to the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. Within a week, Syria must reveal a comprehensive listing of its chemical weapons program. By November, on-site inspections of declared sites must be completed. And by mid-2014, it's hoped to complete the elimination of all chemical weapons material. Mr. Lavrov briefed Russian journalists. He had insisted that there would be no mention of the use of force if the Syrians failed to comply.
In the approach that we have agreed, nothing is said about the use of force, nor about automatic sanctions. Any violations should be reviewed in the Security Council.
But the Americans got the Russians to agree an accelerated timetable.
The world will now expect the Assad regime to live up to its public commitments. And as I said at the outset of these negotiations, there can be no games, no room for avoidance, or anything less than full compliance by the Assad regime.
There are many things that could go wrong, but the two men seem to have forged a good relationship.
We're finished.
Mr. Lavrov said the deal had been done in record time. But the Americans may yet resort to airstrikes if President Assad tries to hide his chemical arsenal or hinder inspections.
Since this plan emerged only with a credible threat of U.S. military action, we will maintain our military posture in the region to keep the pressure on the Assad regime. And if diplomacy fails, the United States and the international community must remain prepared to act.
President Assad may lose his chemical weapons, but he's regained legitimacy. The Americans who said he must relinquish power now have to work with him. His forces are still pounding rebel-held suburbs of Damascus. Opposition leaders who had called for US airstrikes feel betrayed. Let the Kerry-Lavrov plan go to hell, said one. But if the chemical weapons deal is accompanied by broader peace talks, there's just a chance that Syrians might emerge from the hell they've endured for the last 2 years.
Lindsey, how achievable is this really?
Well, I was talking to a former chemical weapons inspector who worked in Iraq. He said, look, it's very difficult. The Americans and the Russians agree that there are 1,000 tons of chemical weapons in Syria. Now that, he said, is 1 million litres. In Ghouta, where the chemical weapons were used on August the 21st, where we saw all those children choking to death, there were maybe 200 or 400 litres used. So that gives you an idea of the extent of it across probably 42 sites. There's a war going on. He said they're going to need blue berets, UN troops, to protect the chemical weapons inspectors as they do their job. One of the things that the document says is that these chemical weapons could be taken to a third country. He suggested Iraqi Kurdistan as a safe and peaceful place. Of course, there's an irony there, because it was in Halabja in Kurdistan that Saddam Hussein gassed the Kurds. They have a reason to try and help on this. But all of this, it's complex, it's difficult, it's physically and diplomatically well, you know, we're talking about a timetable of doing something that should take 6 to 10 years, doing it in a week, a month, and finishing by the middle of next year. It's incredibly difficult. But the diplomats who met here say it's the only hope there is for Syria.
Thanks, Lindsey.